Thank you for listening to the Jeremiah Gunn Show. This program will be recorded for quality and training purposes. Our associate is busy talking to other community members. I don't know how that helps you, but your call will be answered in the order it was received. I don't know how that helps either, or how you would imagine we would do it, but we always include it for your safety and convenience, free of charge. Did you know that our host is under oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help him God? Did you also know that you can go online and do everything online that you can do by giving us a call? In fact, we'd prefer that since we're not answering anyway. It's always included for your convenience, free, and by God, that's enough. All right, thank you for listening to the Jeremiah Gunn Show. This is the Jeremiah Gunn Show. I'm your undocumented expert. I'm coming to you in truth and love. Truth. It's about time that we had it. We just haven't had it in a long time. So this is part 3 of the magical, tragical history tour of us. Us. Whenever I say us, it's the United States. This program's dedicated to Charlie Kirk. Always will be. God bless Charlie Kirk and everything he did for us, the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The republic, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. We're going to keep saying that because there are going to be a lot of shows about democracy. This is not a democracy. We're continuing on this magical history tour, just to kind of a walk through the whole history of the United States. And I think we left off at the Civil War, which kind of started with border ruffians going into Kansas. Kansas is always the bleeding edge, and that's where John Brown came from, the first martyr that tried to end the Civil War, tried to end slavery for God's sake, and was taken out by the Democrats, and, kind of the rest is history. So before we talk about the Civil War, that's kind of the stuff that led up to it. And the Republican Party was born to get rid of slavery. Mr. Lincoln was not very popular, but he got involved in politics when he saw that we were not going to deal with slavery. We didn't deal with it in the Constitution originally, and we didn't deal with it in all the people that preceded him, all the Democrats. So I'd like to talk about the spirit of the Civil War and what the point of it was. One of which is a beautiful song called "The Minstrel Boy." That if you watch a great movie called Gettysburg, there is a soliloquy by one of the great heroes, a professor from Maine named Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. And when we went to Little Round Top, which was kind of the high water mark of the Civil War and the turning point of the Civil War, when the South came into the North to try to bring the war to us, and they were going to, after winning in Gettysburg, they were going to turn right and head east into Washington, D.C., and just capture it, and probably would have, because government didn't work any better then than it does now. So anyway, let's get into this. The Minstrel Boy was an Irish song about an Irish hero and a martyr who played the harp for his unit, and these words are just beautiful. And these two lovely young ladies who sing it. Have a listen to it. Actually, there's another great movie called Rough Riders that features the story of Teddy Roosevelt, and they adopted for their battalion, squadron, whatever it was, that Colonel Roosevelt led in the war in Cuba against Spain. They adopted it as their anthem. So it comes to us from Ireland through the Union Army, and let's see if we can do this.
Minstrel boy to the war has gone, in the ranks of death you will find him. His father's sword he is girded on, and his wild harp strung behind him. The land of song cried the warrior bard, though all the world betrays thee. thy rights shall guard, one faithful heart shall praise thee. The minstrel fell, but the foeman's chains could not bring his proud soul under. The harp he loved ne'er spoke again, for he tore its cords asunder, and said, no chain shall sully thee, thy soul of love and bravery. Thy song was made for the pure and free, and shall never sound in slavery. Thy song was made for the pure and free, and shall never sound in slavery.
So, thy song was made for the pure and free and shall never sound in slavery. So, I mean, if you don't think that that's the story of America, it began with a rebellion against tyranny and took the Civil War in our adolescence to really be the second revolution and really try to seal the deal. But as you'll find out, the Democrats screwed it up. But there's two great movies, at least, that made about the Civil War. One of them is Lincoln by Spielberg. Could have been better, but not bad. It was based on Doris Kearns Goodwin's book called Team of Rivals. The other book that was made into a movie was called The Killer Angels by Michael Shera or something. Anyway, he made a movie. Ted Turner actually made a movie for TV and then released it in the theaters. We saw it in the theaters, but it's called Gettysburg. The sequel to that, called Gods and Generals, that had Robert Duvall as Robert E. Lee, not good, not anywhere near as good. But this one, there was a hero who got the Congressional Medal of Honor. He was a professor from Bowdoin College in Maine. I worked with a couple of guys, engineers from Bowdoin College in Maine. He was wound up being the president and wound up being the governor of Maine, but he was just a professor who asked for a sabbatical to go into the Civil War. A lot of professors fought in the Civil War. There's a scene in Gettysburg where they meet at the Battle in Gettysburg, and that was around the 4th of July. I think it was culminated on the 4th of July, so pretty fascinating connection to our history, because I think if they had lost Gettysburg, probably would have had to settle the war and give slavery to the Democrats. So Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain was this professor who asked for a sabbatical, and he was going to go in the Civil War. He felt like it was his duty as a manly man to fight for what the founding fathers pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor for. And he would read books on the military at night in the trenches. In fact, in one battle, he was wounded, but in one battle he stacked up the dead comrades like sandbags, and it was so cold that he pulled one of the dead bodies' coat over him to stay warm. So a professor of religion and logic and or applied rhetoric or something like that at Bowdoin College winds up being a winner of the Congressional Medal of Honor because at night he studied military manuals and he understood what the fight was for. There's two excellent, there's a lot of wonderful soliloquies in the movie Gettysburg. One of them is by a sergeant named Buster Kilrain, and he talks about, we're going to include that in one of the shows on race, but marvelous, just magnificent. This one is Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, and just to set it up, he was from Maine, 20th Maine. And these people tended to stick with the people from their state that they enlisted with. But at one point, a Pennsylvania unit or something met him and said, "Look, we got these guys who want to desert. They want to quit." They said that their enlistment agreement was to fight with their guys from Maine, with their unit. And when they got transferred to another unit, they said, that's it. I mean, you're breaking our deal, so we're going to go home. They also were very, very disappointed in the leadership that they had. So they hand him over to Colonel Chamberlain, who's in charge of all the Maine units and 20th Maine, and they said, hey, these guys are yours, and if they don't cooperate, you can shoot them because they're essentially deserters. They felt like there was a breach in the contract. So let me see if I can cue this up. I actually went to Little Round Top and stood on that hallowed ground where he made sort of a last stand here. Well, thank you. That's not working out here. Let's see. Skip. Okay. Here we go. He assembles the troops that are thinking that they want to desert or go back to Maine in their mind. And he makes this little speech to them to tell them what this war is all about. I don't think there's a better one to describe the Civil War and what it was for.
I've been talking with Private Buckland. He's told me about your problem. There's nothing I can do today. We're moving out in a few minutes. We'll be moving all day. I've been ordered to take you men with me. I'm told that, that if you don't come, I can shoot you. Well, you know I won't do that. Maybe somebody else will, but I won't. So, that's that. Here's the situation. The whole Reb Army is up that road a ways waiting for us, so this is no time for an argument like this. I tell you, we could surely use you fellas. We're now well below half strength. Whether you fight or not, that's up to you. Whether you come along is well, you're coming. You know who we are, what we're doing here, but if you're going to fight alongside us, there's a few things I want you to know. This regiment was formed last summer in Maine. There were 1,000 of us then. There are less than 300 of us now. All of us volunteered to fight for the Union, just as you did. Some came mainly because we were bored at home. Thought this looked like it might be fun. Some came because we were ashamed not to. Many of us came because it was the right thing to do. And all of us have seen men die. This is a different kind of army. If you look back through history, you will see men fighting for pay, for women, for some other kind of loot. They fight for land, power. Because a king leads them, or just because they like killing. We are here for something new. This has not happened much in the history of the world. We are an army out to set other men free. America should be free ground. All of it. Not divided by a line between slave state and free. All the way. From here to the Pacific Ocean. No man has to bow. No man born to royalty. Here we judge you by what you do, not by who your father was. Here you can be something. Here is the place to build a home. But it's not the land. There's always more land. It's the idea that we all have value. You and me. What we're fighting for, in the end, we're fighting for each other. Sorry, I didn't mean to preach. You go ahead. You talk for a while. If you choose to join us, you want your muskets back, you can have them. Nothing more will be said by anybody anywhere. If you choose not to join us, well, you can come along under guard, and when this is all over, I will do what I can to see you get a fair treatment, but for now, we're moving out. Gentlemen, I think if we lose this fight, we lose the war. So if you choose to join us, I'll be personally very grateful.
Well, I listened to that the other day in preparation for this show and Buster Culrane's little speech, and I got to tell you, I have to be honest with you, it's hard for me not to cry. I don't cry, but it's hard for me not to weep.
That performance has a raw...
It's not to get lost, Gemini. It's hard for me not to get choked up to hear that, because no one said it better. Lincoln said it as well, but this was one of the upper caste, a professor talking to fishermen, farmers, shipbuilders, mechanics, tanners, maybe congressmen, I don't know, but just like he said, we're fighting for each other, e pluribus unum, for us. And, when I first started thinking about the Civil War, I've been interested in it my whole life. My parents bought me a book on it when I was 9 or 10 for Christmas. American Heritage series. Anyway, there's something captivating about that conflict, because, they'll tell you, if you go to school, they'll tell you all these useless things, horrible things, like, for example, that they'll tell you that Lincoln really didn't want to free the slave, but why did those men join the Union and fight? Well, he kind of described it. The Democrats wanted all the states, each state, to have their own decision on whether they would be slave or free. That was the whole reason that Lincoln got in politics. He was about to get out, but then the Fugitive Slave Act and all of these horrible precedents that Democrat Chief Justices on SCOTUS would do. Some of this is too much. It's just for another show. But anyway, he explained that we can't let that happen. We can't let this happen to us, the United States of America, because it would end the country. The Democrats in the southern states, agrarian philosophy, as we covered last time, plantation aristocracy structure compared to the everyman. If they were allowed to continue this and treat their fellow Americans and take the United States assets, bases, ports, cities, states, they didn't belong to them. They had no right. As Ben Franklin said, with his counterparts from Virginia, he said, if we don't all hang together, we'll all hang separately. The United States would have been broken up. And that's why Lincoln got involved. So the Civil War, was born to end slavery. Got 0 Democrat votes. The Democrats in the North, it wasn't North and South. Just don't believe these lies and silly, stupid, juvenile arguments. Lincoln had a great VP, vice president, first term. It was a guy from Maine. I think his name is Hannibal Hamlin. And if he had kept him in a second term, 1864, 3 years into the war, things would have been a lot different. But the only reason that he won is because there was a faction called the War Democrats in the North. And remember, there were no Democrats in Congress from the South during the Civil War, but there were a lot in the North. And the Democrats ran a general, a horrible general, just like all the horrible generals that they gave politically. These were political appointments. They're the ones who caused the war to drag on. And there was one named McClellan. He was very popular with his troops because he never did anything. In fact, Lincoln called his Army of the Potomac, he called him McClellan's bodyguard. He was always sending telegraphs to Lincoln saying, we're greatly outnumbered. We need more men. We need more troops. We need more stuff. We need more engineering to cross these rivers. We're gonna bivouac here. We're not going to attack. Just Lincoln had to go see him and just practically beg him to do something. One point, McClellan told him that our horses are too tired, and he said, "What could they possibly have done to make them tired?" He just couldn't stand. He had to fire him. McClellan hated Lincoln. He was a very arrogant, racist Democrat, and he thought he could run against him. He called Lincoln things like the original gorilla and the great baboon. One time Lincoln went to visit him, and he just came into his house and went upstairs and went to bed, just ignored Lincoln. Commander-in-Chief. Kind of like Millie, it sounds like. But anyway. So he ran against him in 1864, and, Lincoln almost lost. But he won because the war Democrats, they were in favor of the war. Maybe they were profiting from it. Maybe that was the original military-industrial complex, but they wanted the war, but they wanted to be Democrats. So they made Lincoln choose the military governor of Tennessee, a guy named Andrew Johnson. Kind of like Lyndon Johnson, a lot like Lyndon Johnson. But he took over when a Democrat actor shot Lincoln right after the war was over. And he took over, and he pretty much undid everything that's why he got impeached by the Republican Congress, because he undid all of the wins and the blood and suffering to free the slaves. He undid it all. He was a racist. He believed in slavery, but he wanted to prosecute the war and kind of achieve Lincoln's wishes. But he wanted to put it back, and basically put back de facto slavery, recreated the KKK, all these things. The Democrat Party, I mean, I say this a lot, but it's really true. So anyway, Lincoln thought he was going to lose, but fortunately the soldiers put him over the top. And so anyway, we move up past the Civil War, and we get into the Civil War was followed by a sequence of Republican generals, really. You had Rutherford B. Hayes. First you had Hiram Ulysses Grant. That was his name, Hiram Ulysses Grant. He became Sam Grant, or U.S. Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, Ulysses Sam Grant, because they just, when he got to West Point, they said, you look like a Sam, and they gave him the nickname Sam. They said, I think his name's Sam, so that's where it became U.S. Grant, which he turned that into unconditional surrender. But he had, his life up till then was bankruptcy and failure. In fact, it's really interesting. This guy that wound up being one of his pallbearers when Lincoln discovered Grant was in charge of the war in the West, and he was a really good man. His wife came from slave owners and didn't understand why Grant was not into slavery. He's from Ohio, but but just about everything he tried to do, I think he tried to be a tanner and a storekeeper and all this. I mean, he failed at all these things until he succeeded in the military. But he had to, he was in charge of the war in the West. So he laid siege to places like Vicksburg, Mississippi, and things like that. And he was pretty good fighter. Ultimately, Lincoln said, I can't spare this man. He fights. And so he laid siege to this fort, and eventually the commander of the fort asked for terms, and he said, no terms but unconditional surrender. Well, The commander of that fort was a guy who bailed him out. First, one of the many times he went bankrupt and failed in his business. So he had to go to his savior and tell him unconditional surrender. Anyway, that guy wound up being one of his pallbearers when Grant died from throat cancer. Mark Twain wrote his autobiography, and he was General Hiram Ulysses Grant. He was just a great, great man. So he became president, but then there was a succession. All the presidents were Republican, and they were mostly war heroes, generals. Rutherford Burchard Hayes, and then James Abram Garfield. Reading a great book about him right now, Destiny of the Republic. I think Netflix made a series about him, but I think he could write with one hand in Latin and one hand in Greek or Hebrew at the same time. The guy was just a brilliant guy. He got into college by being a janitor to pay his way through. Sort of, I think Booker T. Washington did the same thing. But anyway, he wound up being such a great student and such a great person that he wound up becoming one of the professors, and they'd asked him if he could teach more and more class. He wound up being the president of that university. But he was a general in the Civil War that basically saved Kentucky from the Democrats. And Kentucky was pivotal, absolutely pivotal. So you had all the way down to, there was only one Democrat who was really a Republican, and that was Grover Cleveland, the guy that skipped 2 terms just like Trump did. But McKinley was a great, great man. Did a lot of things for black people. Great president. He was shot by an anarchist named Leon Kolgaj, who was from where else? Cleveland, Chicago, that kind of stuff. Anarchist. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. So on 1876, interesting time. He had Custer's Last Stand. There's this great movie where it's called Little Big Man, and again, it's got a lot of sex and violence, okay, and more sex than violence for whatever reason. But Dustin Hoffman starred in it. It's about a scout who worked. He would work for Custer's unit, and then he would work for. They'd go back to the Indians. He kind of was raised by the Indians, kidnapped by the Indians, raised by the Indians, back and forth. Anyway, but he's talking to this old mentor, this grandfather. He just called him grandfather, this Indian, and he mentions that he had been a scout for Custer most recently, and he said General George Armstrong Custer or whatever, and grandfather, this wise old noble savage, he says, "Where did he get this name?" And he said, "Oh, he got it in the war between the white men to free the black men, grandfather." And the grandfather says, "Oh, yes." Now, he had gone blind by this time, but he said, "Oh, yes, the black white men, I have seen one." It's pretty interesting. So when I was in college, I think on the first day of a history class, the professor said, go to the library, go to the microfiche section down in the basement or something. Microfiche was kind of like an internet, you could look stuff up, little films that were kept. That's how they kept records. And he said, go to this date, go to the Salt Lake City Star and read this article on this date. So I go, I'm probably the only one in the class that did it. I went down there when I had a few minutes and I looked it up. The Salt Lake City Star, this particular date. Now, Salt Lake City is a long way from Little Bighorn, where Custer was massacred by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, and all of these Sioux that banded together to attack and kill him. And the article read just like what was kind of winding down at the time was the Vietnam War. I mean, it said U.S. troops massacred at Little Bighorn, and it was a couple of weeks after the actual battle because it took a while for news to travel, even with telegraph. But anyway, I just read this whole article. It told the names of the troops and how many were killed and all this. So it's just very interesting to see something. And this was real close to our bicentennial. So in 1976, which would be 100 years from 1876 when that kind of happened. Other things happened. A lot of technology, fascinating. Alexander Graham Bell was around to say that's when he invented the telephone, which came after the Morse code. The story of Morse code is fascinating. Maybe we'll talk about that or another time. But Alexander Graham Bell came here. He was Scottish, and his father and they worked trying to help the deaf to talk. And there was a really, really fascinating book I read about him that talked about what he really wanted to do. The thing I didn't realize is that he did not want sign language, AmSlam or whatever it's called, American Sign Language, ASL. He did not want that. So there were these two factions in the deaf community. He did not want them to do sign language. He thought that would be sort of degrading, to turn them into these, Indians use sign language, savages use sign, and so the book was written from the perspective of a woman whose grandmother was deaf, and if a lot of that community, I don't know if it's still that way. I think kind of indicated that it was, but if they showed a picture of Alexander Graham Bell, they would think they would have the same visceral reaction as if it was a picture of Hitler to Jews or even just decent people. And it's because he was so, I think his daughter deaf as well, but his wife or something, but he and his dad actually built like robots of a face so they could make the mouth shape the phonetics as they talked into it. So this is the kind of stuff, this is kind of how he got started. He thought he could make them a device that could allow them to speak. And so he thought that it was sort of like quitting to just learn sign language. So he kind of had good motives. He was a very, very interesting, very fascinating man to read about. He actually, I believe he actually kind of experimented with fiber optics all the way back then. And then you had the oil boom. Oil was discovered actually in Pennsylvania, not Texas or Oklahoma or anything else. Certainly not Saudi Arabia. We brought it to them. But Rockefeller became these, barons, and the history of these people, Edison, Westinghouse, Tesla, Hershey, who made chocolate and became this tremendous philanthropist who took care of orphans and built a whole city just on candy, but he failed. Read a biography of him or listen to one. Fascinating. Thomas Edison was homeschooled because his mother was a teacher, but the public school told her he's a failure. He had a problem hearing because he was a boy who worked as an errand boy on a train, and he was late and he was running, and the guy pulled him up to the train by his ears to kind of punish him and snapped one of them. So he had a hard time hearing, but his public school teachers told him that he's never going to amount to anything. So she was a school teacher, so she tried homeschooling. Most of the people on Mount Rushmore were homeschooled. Yeah, not bad. So we had assassinations and by these Democrat devils that just turned our country into the thing that it was. And, they continue to character assassinate people. When Oblabla got in office, one of the things he did was he changed Mount McKinley to Denali, which is the name of some local tribe, one that he chose. He always picked winners and losers. I'm sure that other tribes called it something else, but whenever it is with these native languages, it just means something like big pile of dirt. They didn't call it the Hudson River. They called it the river that runs, or the water that opens up at the sea or something. It's just, it's primitive, but McKinley was a good man. He did great things. He did great things for the country and for minorities, for blacks too. But, Obama has to change it back. Just pandering, the Black Panther Party, have to pander to the native Siberians and go, well, I'm going to change it back to Denali. Denali means big pile of dirt. That's nice. That really helps everybody, especially when you're singling out one tribe that probably was warring with the neighbor tribes who had a different name for it. It doesn't matter. As long as you virtue signal and tear down Republican heroes. I think McKinley was, he was instrumental, I think, in desegregating places like Washington, D.C. Woodrow Wilson, the good Democrat, he resegregated it. He was such a racist Democrat. But I repeat myself. So one thing that the Civil War caused was it caused some horrible, a lot of woman-run households, just like the War on Poverty and the Great Society did. It kind of converted. The men were dead. The brothers, fathers, uncles, sons. And so, you had people that became socially conscious, caring nurturers, The story of Wizard of Oz written around that time. And that's considered one of the first stories where a woman is the heroine of the... For some of you that are a little bit younger, heroine doesn't mean heroine. It's a female hero. Now we have to say things like actor. We have to call a woman an actor. We can't call her an actress. So I guess I'm trying to think this through. By taking the name of a man, you're getting some kind of equality. And so I always wondered, what do they do do they have an award? They used to have Best Actress, an Oscar, an Emmy, Best Actress, Best Actor. Now I guess they have Best Actor for a female actor. I don't know. They don't think about these things. They just do them. But anyway, The Wizard of Oz was about the gold standard, which was a big thing. William Jennings Bryan, who wound up running for president several times as a Democrat, he was a hyper, religious guy, and he wanted America on the gold standard, or the silver standard, not the gold standard, or something like that. But that's why it's the fall of the Yellow Brick Road and all these symbols and all these things are in this story. It's really sort of a thinly veiled thing, sort of like Lord of the Rings or Chronicles of Narnia is less veiled, but it's kind of like that. It's kind of a parable about the gold standard. William Jennings Bryan's most famous speech was, "You're not going to crucify us, the United States, on a cross of gold." So they had a big problem because I guess farmers and average Joe had more silver than they had gold. Gold was for the rich, so don't make gold our standard. So very, very weird stuff that went on. So, but the idea is that we heard things growing up like if women ran the world, there would be no wars. Well, that's just not true. And universal suffrage. Suffrage means the right to vote. And people wrote about this long, long ago, all the way from Socrates to Frederick Bastiat and John Adams. And, universal suffrage winds up in universal suffrage. And so, this was kind of we're right now we're at the centennial of that. 1920, universal suffrage. We're at the centennial of that, right? 6 years ago. And like Dr. Phil says, how's that working out for you? No offense. I'm not trying to knock anybody, especially when you can't even say what a woman is anymore. But the Founding Fathers didn't want everybody voting. They didn't want everybody voting because when you do, you get suicidal sympathy, suicidal empathy, you get the gender gap, you get the pity party, these caring nurturers that all of a sudden are without natural affection, as a good book says. They all of a sudden, they don't like men, they don't like children, they don't like women. They can't figure out what they want. They just want power. And the Daughters of the Confederacy, they're the ones who made all of these racist statues. They're the ones who made all these racist statues. I talked about one on one of the shows that we saw in Mississippi near the gigantic Vatican-like Confederate graveyard. But they were called the Daughters of the Confederacy, and they're the ones who really, kept the same. They built a lot of those monuments like Stone Mountain and stuff, like in the 50s, because they kind of just get worried that civil rights were going to become a thing. So that kind of bothered them. So now we're up to around, that's 1870s all the way up to, it raised guys like Woodrow Wilson. And we had this university system from Germany. We had we didn't have a PhD or university system here. We had the Ivy Leagues. Harvard is our oldest institution, but those were started to be seminaries. Those were for seminaries. Dartmouth, which I think is in New Hampshire, they were started as a seminary to reach the Indians, the Native Americans, to create missionaries to send out to them, as the French had done when they came here. But in the 1919s, we had the great Spanish flu, the great pandemic. We talked about that on other programs, but basically that was a first time where the government began to take control of your life, like they did. Nothing like they did this one, but it was 100 years from that. They did the same thing with COVID. Used it as an opportunity to just take over your life, and that's what they do. Another interesting thing that happened in 1919, actually January 15th, in Boston, there's a saying, there used to be a saying, as slow as molasses in January, and they say that came from the South, where they made a lot of molasses, and when it was really cold, it didn't run as well because of the viscosity affected by the cold. But anyway, in Boston, there was this 2.3 million gallon tank of molasses just north of the city. And, Boston is a little bit like San Francisco, not as bad, but it's kind of hilly. You go there, walk the Freedom Trail in the winter, you could slide pretty good. It's not fun. But anyway, so they had this 1919, January 15th. Interesting, slow as molasses in January, but this wasn't very slow. 2.3 million gallon tank. You can look it up online. That's 27 million pounds. It's 13.5 tons. It's about 10,000 cars come flooding out of there. And you go, how much damage could molasses do? My God. But it's quite heavier than water. It resulted in 21 dead and 150 injured and a lot of property damage. They said that in subsequent summers to follow, you still smelled molasses in the air when you went to that part of town. So the other thing we had was anarchists. We had anarchists come, and it was an anarchist that shot McKinley a few years prior. And, there was a lot of concern about immigration. I know we talk about Emma Lazarus, give me your poor, you're tired. We just watched an old movie made in 1941, and they actually made that little poem more important than life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's exactly what happened. They thought that, what she meant was, anybody, anything goes, anybody come. But we had a concern. Actually, SCOTUS was so afraid of anarchists that they actually ruled that anybody who announces in public that they're an anarchist is breaking the law. Today, fast forward, I like to watch Gutfeld sometimes, Greg Gutfeld, and he has this guest who has a podcast named Michael Malice, who's, interesting little guy, and he says, I'm an anarchist. I'm an anarchist. I'm an anarchist. So what were they doing? What were the anarchists doing? In Europe, they were killing, they were assassinating people, and we had only had two, Lincoln and Garfield, until this one shot McKinley. He was an anarchist. You could argue that John Wilkes Booth, but anyway, they were blowing things up, like Obama's friend Bill Ayer. They were blowing up buildings, and Sacco and Vanzetti and all this stuff that they'll try to tug at your heartstrings about these poor guys just because they were immigrants. Same thing with the Rosenbergs, who were spies for the Soviet Union. So we didn't particularly like socialists. But as we talked about in other shows, we went to the word social. It used to mean like a church social or the society page or social, and we turned it into, no, socialism is good. Socialism is good, and that's when it started happening. So I'm going to read some things. Well, it's going to have to wait till next time. But socialism is not good. It's not good. It's actually horrible. It's actually what was not wanted. And when this country was founded, it was founded on anything but socialism. And when I talk about founded, I'm not talking about Edmund Burke, who was animated our thinkers and that set up our Constitution and so forth. I'm talking about, although he does, I'm talking about the Mayflower Compact, which saved our original country, where they said, no, you don't work, you don't eat. So we're going to talk about socialism in the next one. Thank you for listening. This is Jeremiah Gunn Show, saying thank you. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. This is really important. I don't hear anybody saying all of this. Nobody. We're trying to tell the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth. And the truth will make you free. You want to be free, don't you? Please? You're going to lose it.